Okay, Rabboisai, continuing with organ transplants in Halacha. We discussed that with organ transplants giving over from one dead person to another live person, there were 4 issues that we discussed. The first potential problem was nivel hames, which is Isser Deraisa. The second problem was this person that died, there's a chiyuv kfura on those organs. The third issue that we discussed was there's the Isser Hana. The body of a mace is Asr B'Hana. How could we use it? And there was a 4th issue that we didn't discuss last week, which is that often to get the organ from the dead body to the new recipient, from the donor to the recipient, there may be ritzicha, there may be killing of the donor involved, and we're going to discuss that this week. As a quick reminder regarding the issues of nivel hames, kfuras hames, and Isser Hana, we had a difficult time, but we were more or less able to wiggle out of those issues, and in the tremendous makam tzarech of Pekuach Nefesh, we have what to be saimach on. But this 4th issue is going to be more complex, and let's understand. To my understanding, the way that it works when somebody gives over a heart or liver or kidney from somebody that just passed away in a car accident or something of the sort, the way that it works is they take this person who has no longer any brain function, has what I guess they call brain death, and their body is still alive. Their heart is still pumping, and with machine help, generally. And they are going to take that heart out of that brain dead body and now give it from the donor's body to a recipient's body. Is that okay? So let's, and by the way, they're also going to be taking out the liver, and they're also going to be taking out the kidneys. Now, you might be thinking that, kidneys, I know kidneys aren't a problem. My cousin gave a kidney. Yes, it's true, your cousin may have given a kidney, but not the way that they do it in one of these post-brain death kidney transplants. When they do a regular kidney donation from a living person, it's a very precise cut in the right exact way to take it out in a very gentle form. The way that it's done to this person that just went through a car accident or whatever it may be, we are just cutting the body open and getting that kidney as quick as possible. So for somebody who's in a very precarious state, cutting their body open and grabbing out their kidneys will kill them as well. So is this a issue? Now, in halachic literature, in what we've seen in the past, in Gemaras, etc., actually, I'll just start in history at large until very recently. It was very simple. All neurological, mental activity, all breathing, all cardiological, if that's the right way of putting it, all the heart activity, breathing activity, heart activity, neurological activity, it all stopped more or less the same time. Because if there's no breathing, the body's going to die. There's going to be no heartbeat. If there's no heartbeat, you're not going to be able to breathe. And if there's no neurological activity, it's not going to be able to tell the body to do these activities. So the way that it always was, there wasn't never much of a shayla. Which one is the factor that defines death? Is it the lack of neurological activity, the lack of breathing, or the lack of heartbeat? So there is therefore no explicit Memra Chazal to tell us what it is that defines death. Because it used to be all 3 would happen at the same time. What if 1 or 2 out of those 3 were to happen? Does that determine death? We do not have any clear, explicit source. However, there is some not explicit sources. There are some places out there where the Torah says, we have a Gemara in Yuma, Pei Heyam and Aleph. Let's see if we can deduce the halacha from this Gemara, Yuma, Pei Heyam and Aleph. The Gemara says that there's an isser of digging out the rubble, digging out somebody from the rubble. So let's say a house collapsed and there was somebody, we knew there was one person inside the house and it collapsed. Now we want to dig out the rubble on Shabbos. Can we? Well, if there's a potential life, he may still be alive and you could save his life by digging out the rubble. Of course you could dig out the rubble. Yes, it may be Issa Deraisa, but you push away that Isser Deraisa in order to save a life. What if the person's certainly dead? So we are not over Isser Deraisa for Kavod HaMeis. When you're digging out to find the person and you come to his nose, and I'm just jumping to the conclusion of the Gemara, and you get to his nose and you see there is no breathing, the Gemara says you cannot continue to dig him out. Why not? Because he's dead. And if he's dead, there's no heter to be over the Issa Deraisa of digging him out, because it's not Pekuach Nefesh. He's already dead. Some want to deduce from this Gemara that you know what determines death when the person is no longer breathing on their own. That person is considered to be dead. And once we saw Ruach Ba'apai, that there was no more breath in his nose, we saw that he was no longer breathing. That means that this person is dead. Others argue with that and claim that is not a proof. Why? That is not the cause of death. That is not what makes somebody dead, that they are no longer breathing. It's merely a siman. It's merely an indication that the person has died. It's not what defines death. It's the siman, it indicates death. Somebody's buried under rubble, and you get to see, I don't know how long it takes to dig him out, probably a significant amount of time. And by the time you get to his face, you see that you get to his nose, and he's not breathing, you could be sure that he is not dead. He is probably not connected to a EKG machine under that rubble that's keeping his heart pumping. And therefore, since nobody was ever chayshish that he was connected to the EKG machine under the rubble, therefore it would be very certain and clear that the lack of breathing indicates death. And I'll point out, I don't know whether they used to be able to bring somebody breathing back, but we're talking about where you, at a point where you can't bring breathing back, because if it was something that they were able to back then, and obviously you would be mechuyev to try to, resuscitate the person and bring it back. So we're obviously talking about a point of no return. Okay, so that is debatable source number one. There is another source that some want to bring to prove and define when is the point of death. There is a Mishnah in Oilos, Perek Aleph, Mishnah Vav, and it's discussing an animal. If an animal gets decapitated, it gets its head cut off, but its body is still moving, the Mishnah says that corpse is still, at that point, is already mitama, with maga or masa. If you touch that corpse of that animal body, you are tameh. Oh, it's moving. That's merely reflexes. That's merely spasms, I should say. But that is not life. So some want to say when the body is brain dead, when there's no longer any brain activity, so that brain is disconnected from the body, so to speak, and now that the brain is disconnected from the body, this person is called dead. Okay? Let's see how this works out. Where those that argue first would say that you can't compare a physical decapitation where you completely sever the head to merely when there isn't brain activity and the brain is no longer running the body. Furthermore, generally the way that it works is that there is some activity because the brain still controls the body temperature and hormones, even though it doesn't, let's say, make the body breathe and it doesn't make the heart pump, but it is doing some stuff. So you can't call that a complete decapitation. Furthermore, there are cases of pregnant women who became brain dead, and they were able to keep the baby growing in the mother's stomach till even full term, and then perform a C-section to get the baby out. So we see that there is some functions going on in the body, so you can't call that decapitation, and that is another argument. There is a middle opinion, but this middle opinion is more about a vart, so to speak, more theoretical than practical. And it says that I would agree that we would consider somebody decapitated if there was a complete separation between the brain activity and the body and there was no connection. But lemaisa, that mitzias of an absolute non-connection between the brain and the body, practically as of now only occurs after the heart stops beating. That doesn't occur before the heart stops beating, so that is more of a theoretical case than a practical case. And to be clear, when we say brain death, I'm not referring to a coma. I'm not referring to a PVS, persistent vegetative state, which is something that some people could get out of, which they say that the body feels certain things happening. Maybe there's an element of reflexes. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about brain death where there is zero mental activity. Okay. Fine. There's a famous story that happened in the early 1700s. That there was a girl who was, I guess the mother probably just shechted the chicken. The girl was cleaning out the chicken, and the girl said, "Mommy, the chicken has no heart." Yeah, and not from the Wizard of Oz. No, the chicken was not in the Wizard of Oz, but this chicken had no heart. So the mother said, come on. I'm sure the cat that was right on the, waiting for the leftovers that you're going to throw out from the chicken, the heart probably fell on the floor and the cat ate it. Come on. Obviously the chicken had a heart. So they went to the local Rav, and the local Rav said, Treifa. The halacha is if the chicken has no heart, obviously it's a treifa, and therefore it's not kosher. They went to the Rav of the town. The mother said, come on, this is ridiculous. Mother went to the Rav of the town, none other than the Chacham Tzvi, and said, what's the halacha with the chicken? And the Chacham Tzvi said, it's kosher. Why? The cat ate the heart. It's impossible that a chicken, a perfectly healthy looking chicken like this, didn't have a heart. It's impossible. I don't need a raya against any idiots that would paskin otherwise. Then in a second tshuva, the Chassam Sofer writes, well, I'm pretty surprised, I'm pretty shocked, but apparently there's a chacham that questioned my psak. Derek Agav, he was referring to Rabbi Yonasan Eberstatz, who was also known as the Kresi Uplesi in his sefer. So he said, I'm surprised. Apparently a chacham argued with me. So I'll explain. It's obvious for a couple of reasons. As the Zohar says, and as the Rambam says, the heart is the source of life. So it's obvious, l'maisa, and we know that the heart is the life source. And if the heart is the life source, even if you have 100 Eidim telling me there was no heart, they're all puzzle for Eidus, because there's obviously a heart. And that's it. That's the psak. Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz, he said, it happens to be, I agree with you in this case, but Pashtus, that's really what happened, that the heart fell out. But you saying that I wouldn't believe 100 Eidim, you've gone too far. The Cham Tzvi's gone too far. Why can't there be a chicken without a heart? Because science says there can't be a chicken without a heart? I want to tell you something. Aristotle, he said a whole bunch of things, and everybody treated it as fact. And you know what? Lots of it was wrong. Because you know why? Zakt Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz, science gets it wrong. They always get it wrong. You can't rely on science. We don't rely on science. We rely on Eidim. If Eidim say the chicken had no heart, then that means that the chicken had no heart. L'maisa, Cham Tzvi ended up getting run out of town based on this machlokes. It ended up being a big machlokes. L'maisa. So, do we accept brain death as death? Now, you should know, in most places in the world, in Israel, in the US, and they accept brain death as death. Once there's no longer there's mental activity and it's irreversible based on their judgment, then they view the person as being dead. When did they decide this? So it was based on a paper that came out from Harvard. It was decided in 1968. The United States decided that brain death equals death. On unrelated news, the first heart transplant in the United States happened in 1968. That might not have been an absolute coincidence. Many suggest that the idea of considering brain death as death was a necessity in order to facilitate heart transplants. Because if you didn't consider the brain dead person dead, then you would have to kill him to do a heart transplant. That's not moral. But if he's dead already, then medical ethics would say that's completely moral to perform that transplant. So we should understand where this was originally coming from, even though it is accepted across the board. Now I want to point out, my Baich Svara, I understand it. I hear the argument. The argument, as a Baich Svara, as a Svara that comes out of my stomach, let's let this almost dead person, let him die, and we'll give the heart to a perfectly healthy person outside of this heart. It makes sense. But you know what? We don't use what makes sense to us. And we definitely don't use what makes sense to society, because we see where society is going. This is what they said then. Who knows what's going to be in another 30 years? You might in another 30 years say, this privilege, I might start off the guy in death row, we could take his organs. Then it's going to be the guy in life in prison, we could take his organs. Then it's going to be this white privileged guy who did a serious crime. His organs should go to people that are less privileged. Let it go to 8 less privileged people in the name of equity. He's 40 years old. He had 40 years of privilege. Let's take 8 of his key organs and give it to these less privileged people in the name of equity. I'm not saying we're going to get there. I'm just saying we're definitely heading that way. So be very wary of what modern Goyish medical ethics says is okay, because we follow the Torah. What does the Torah say? So, there was somebody named Reb Moshe Tendler. He was the son-in-law of Reb Moshe Feinstein. He was a professor in YU, professor of Talmud, and professor of biology. And he was nifter around a year and a half ago. And he was the big proponent of brain death. This was like one of his big missions in life, showing that brain death is considered death. And based on the two rayas that I said previously, the Gemara in Yuma about uncovering the rubble, and the Mishnah in Oilos about severing the head. And he was a big believer that Jews should donate their organs. And Lamaisa Rebbe Vadia was was pretty much the only one of the big, relatively mainstream poskim who paskin brain death to be considered death. But one thing that he did point out is you can't rely on the doctors what they call brain death. You need somebody with real nemanis to come and say it's absolute brain death, because they have a negia in their morals, and they're going to consider people dead in order to harvest their kidneys and their heart and their liver. So therefore, it has to be somebody with real nemanis who's able to say that they actually are brain dead. Lamaisa, the Chassam Sefer says you need 3 requirements to say that somebody is dead. They need to have no movement like a rock. You can't have any detectable movement. The person has to have no heartbeat. And the person has to not be breathing. And you need all 3. So they seemingly are not working with that Chassam Sefer. So what about this brain death case? This obviously took over the world. Do the other poskim agree? So the Minchas Yitzchak, he paskined, as long as the heart is pumping, that person is alive. And if you go and take the heart out of that person whose heart is pumping, it is vaday ritzicha, it's murder. If you ask the doctor to do it, lifnei iver. Because Adam hu nefesh. What is life? Life is the blood. What does blood mean? The circulation of the blood by the heart. We say somebody who you're allowed to kill, ein loy damim. He has no blood, he has no circulation, he has no heartbeat. Heartbeat is the focus of what deems you alive or deems you dead. The Tzitz Eliezer, who was one of the big medical halacha people, who lived he had a shul in Agrippa, it's not too far away from here. He answered based on the Rambam and based on the Chacham Tzvi, who says what? Who says that the heart is the life source, as we heard in that story. The life source is the heart. So if the heart is beeping, this person is alive. And if you take that heart, you're killing him. And the Tzitz Eliezer warned further, and even if it wasn't for this, you have to be very careful, because these doctors, in their morals, they're going to take the heart out of somebody even when it's before that point, because they would prefer the life of what they view as a full-fledged life over this person which is going to die. So even if it wasn't for the fact that I would hold it ritzicha, I'd be very nervous that this is going to cause ritzicha anyways. Rebbe Yoshev, he also passed in the same way. He didn't accept brain death. He said that's not considered death. You need no neurological activity and no heartbeat. Reb Shlomo Zalman, he actually said he was in Suffolk whether brain death was considered death. And therefore he said it's asur to perform the heart transplant because it's Suffolk ritzicha. What about Reb Moshe Feinstein? What did he hold? This is a controversy. It's a major controversy. What did Reb Moshe hold? So Reb Moshe's son-in-law, as we mentioned, Reb Moshe Tendler, he believed that Reb Moshe held firm that brain death is considered death. It's true Reb Moshe never used the terminology of brain death being considered death, But he did say when there is no longer breathing, the person is considered to have died. And therefore, since somebody who is brain dead no longer breathes by themselves, therefore that person is considered dead. Reb David Feinstein doesn't argue that that's what Rav Moshe held, but he also doesn't exactly agree with that's what Rav Moshe held. Many argue that Rav Moshe held that it was Ritzicha. In a tshuva discussing whether a heart transplant, and this is in the early days, was allowed, Rav Moshe says it's double murder. The guy receiving the heart's going to die and you're going to kill the guy who's giving it. It's double murder. Now each side has their ways of answering up what's what and what did Rav Moshe really hold, and etc. I would say like this. I actually believe that Rav Moshe was the greatest posek of the last generation. And I would take his opinion probably over any individual posek that there is. But in a scenario like this, where we have Mefursha poskim that are certainly Baal Pluksas of Rav Moshe, they're certainly on the same playing field as Rav Moshe, even if they're not as great as Rav Moshe. So I would take a Mefursha Rav Yashiv. I would take a Mefursha Tzitz Eliezer. I would take a Mefursha Minchas Yitzchak. I would take a Mefursha Rav Shlomo Zalman over a questionable Rav Moshe. So l'chayra, it appears from here that the psak l'chayra should be that we should consider that ritzicha, to take the heart out of somebody who is at the state of brain death. And by the way, there's various other nafkaminas. There's a nafkamina where their kohen is allowed to go into the room. For Rav Yashiv, it's a kula in this scenario. Whereas the fear of Tendler, and Rav Avadia would be a chumrah. They wouldn't allow a kohen into the room. We would. And obviously, the other big question is: could you pull the plug? The fear of Tendler, no. Yes, you could pull the plug. This is a chiyav kfur. You got to bury this guy. The fear of Yashiv chas v'shalom. It would be an iser ritzicha to pull the plug. Okay, what about receiving organs? We're discussing, could I go take the organs out of this Jewish person, me the doctor? Could I put myself on the list to receive organs, to receive a heart? So, Rav Shlomo Zalman said you cannot do it in Eretz Yisrael, but you could go to Chutz La'aretz to do it. At first glance, it's a little bit hard to understand the Rav Shlomo Zalman. Manishtana, why is it better to go to Chutz La'aretz, huh? What do you gain by going to Chutz La'aretz? We all know the Rambam says there's an Isser of Ritzicha to a Goy, to a non-Jew. You're not allowed to kill a non-Jew. And therefore, if you're asking the doctor to take the heart out of the non-Jew before he's actually dead, it's an Isser of Lifnei Iver. You're telling the doctor to perform Ritzicha. You're not allowed to do that. Why does it help to go to Chutz La'aretz? So let me ask you another question. It's pekuach nefesh, even when it's a Jewish donor. It's pekuach nefesh for me to get the heart. Why can't I have this donor? He'll get killed, so I can get the heart. It's pekuach nefesh. And the answer is, as we all know, that everything is nitcha by B'kuach Nefesh, except the 3 Gimel Chamuros. And one of the 3 Gimel Chamuros is Shvichas Domim. I'm not allowed to kill this guy to save my life. I can't kill Reuven to save Shimon. Why not? So it's based on a svara. The Gemara gives a svara. My chazis. Who says your blood is any redder than the other guy's blood? How could I get the heart? Who says my blood is redder than his? Maybe this other person, maybe the donor is more important than the recipient. Now, one may argue, the donor is like about to die, he has no brain activity, I have, full life in front of me, maybe I should be able to receive the heart. No. The Svar of my Chazal says we don't differentiate, I don't care, a Yid's a Yid, we don't differentiate who you are, we don't start making Svaras, and we don't let one Jew die to save another Jew. But if the other person is a non-Jew, without the full-fledged neshama, now we could differentiate. The Ma'achazis would apply. I would let the guy die in order to save the Yid. Now, I'm not coming here to suggest that we start killing non-Jews to save Jews. There would be tremendous chilul Hashem, etc. involved in that. But over here, we're talking about a guy that put himself on a donor list. And he signed on the back of his license, he wants to give his heart in this scenario when he's brain dead. So if the guy signed up for this, so there's no chilul Hashem, there's no ma'achazis. If there's no ma'achazis svara, because the value of the Jewish life is greater than the value of the non-Jewish life, then memela you can put yourself on the list and receive the heart. I saw a very interesting svara from Rabbi Bleich. He's one of the Rosh Yeshivas of YU. And he had a very interesting svara. He wanted to suggest that even in Eretz Yisrael, you should be able to receive a heart. Why? What's the svara that you should be able to receive the heart even in Eretz Yisrael? Because he says like this. We all know that there's a much greater demand for organs than supply of organs. There's many people that die on the lists waiting to receive organs. So most people who are on the list to receive a heart never end up getting a heart. They end up dying waiting. Therefore, the heart is going to be taken in the state of Israel. The mitzias on the ground is. The heart is going to be, when the person signed up and agreed to have his heart taken, his heart is going to be taken no matter what. If it's not going to go to Reuven, it's going to go to Shimon. The heart is going to somebody. They're removing that heart anyways. You are not causing the doctor to remove the heart from this person that got into the car accident. The doctor's removing him anyways. The only question, should it go to you or should it go to somebody else? Why not take it? And Zatra Bleich, I think it's a very interesting svara. I guess some of them didn't hold of it. But I thought it was a very interesting svara of why you could take that heart. I have a different svara that would say as well that you could take the heart even in Eretz Yisrael and put yourself on the list even in Eretz Yisrael. Now I'm able to say the svara. I'm not arguing on Rosh Zalman at all. I'm actually taking it a step further. It's one of those like halacha kabasar type ideas. Not that I'm telling you to pass them like me. When this comes up, you're asking somebody bigger than me. But I have a view that is further down than Rosh Zalman. I'll explain you what I mean. No maila and the slightest in knowledge or Torah knowledge or decisive or thought pattern. None of that. But let's watch how this goes. If somebody is a Svardi, they have full right to rely on Rav Avadia. You can't tell a Svardi they're wrong for relying on Rav Avadia. Therefore, if the donor, or probably more correctly the doctor, is either a Svardi, or a Goy, or an Arab, then Mabaya, they're allowed to give the heart. Because Rav Avadia, if they're a Goy, for sure, fine. And if they're not a Goy, Rav Avadia paskins, the brain dead person is dead. So therefore, Al-Pi Roiv, I don't know exactly if Roiv doctors are Sfardim and Goyim. I know Roiv of the country certainly is Sfardim and Goyim. They make up the Roiv. And once again, it's not doctors overall. It's the doctors that perform these transplants, maybe. Who knows what the mitzias on that is. But we could take certainly if we take the population as a whole, Roiv of the population is Sfardi or Arab, and therefore, Al Pi Roiv, I should be able to get it. Now, since Rav Shomzam didn't agree with Rav Avadia, so therefore he can't be mitzvah for that lakula. But maybe we could. Obviously, don't rely on this without asking. Obviously, a big shayla, but I think it's very interesting. And one could also argue, perhaps this wouldn't work necessarily in Rav Yashiv or the Minchas Yitzchak that said it was Vadei Ritzicha, but this could work within Rav Shlomo Zalman. Perhaps you have a Svek Sveka. What's the svek sveka? The svek sveka is it's a suffix whether the organ is coming from a Jew or from a guy. And imtim sulaymer, it's coming from a Jew. Suffix if it's considered ritzicha, or suffix if it's not considered ritzicha. And maybe there's a svek sveka, but once again, it is not pashut. One could argue that since it's a pretty good roiv of Yidden, 75-80%, maybe we don't call that a suffix. I'm not answering that shayla, I'm just saying it's what to think about. One more very interesting point is a point that Reb Menachem Kasher makes, which is very interesting. Now, if you think about it, when you receive a heart in a heart transplant, what happens? They take out your not functioning heart, and they put in the new heart. Dr. Menachem Kasher, based on the Chacham Tzvi and the Rambam, the source of life is the heart. So what happens when they take out your heart? You lost your source of life. And now they give you a new heart. You regained a new source of life. What's the halacha? What's the nafkamina in that? The nafkamina is when you were no longer alive, you weren't married to your wife. So when they took out your heart, at that point, you're no longer married to your wife. New heart in, you have to do a new kedushin to your wife. And your kids were already Yerush you. You don't own anything. It already went down to your kids because you lost your source of life when your heart was taken out. I don't know whether Menachem Kasher meant this halacha l'maisa or he meant this as a geschmack of art. But Mimanav Shach, it's a geschmack of art. I don't think we would say it halacha l'maisa. I want to spend a couple more minutes discussing the live kidney donation. It's a beautiful thing, l'chayra. One yid goes and gives his kidney to another yid, maybe a family member, maybe a stranger. And now this yid is able to make that other yid's life be extended. Now, is that a chiyuv? Is it a rishus? Is it aser? Let's think about it for a second. Now, there's a Gemara that says if someone is in a state of sakana, they're drowning, there's bandits heading towards their way, and you could save them, you have a chiyuv to save them. You can't just sit by and watch the person drown. Lo yisamod al dam reyecha, stated in the Torah. And therefore there's an isser to just sit around while your friend dies. Zok the Ramah, we know that not to do a mitzvah saseh, you have to give up to a fifth of your money. Not to be over a lois saseh, you have to be willing to give up all your money not to be over a lois saseh. The Shach has an interesting question. Do I have to give up a limb of my body not to be over a lois saseh? Meaning the guy says, be mechal Shabbos or I'll cut your arm off. Do I have to let my arm get cut off? I know to avoid this I have to give all my money. What about a body part? What about a limb? And the Maisa, the Shach says tzarachin. It's unclear. And the kidney is a body part, and that would fit into the tzarachin. And if that would fit into the tzarachin, therefore you can't say that I'm mechuyev to give it. If the shach was in suffix, so therefore it remains the tzarachin. So lo yisam adam reyecha would be very hard to use that to prove that I need to give a kidney. The Pri Megadim brings the Radbaz. Let's say a guy says, Reuben, either let me cut off your arm, or I am going to kill Shimon. Do I have to let my arm get cut off to save Shimon? So the Pri Megadim says, L'chayra, we have a kal v'chaymer. There's a halacha that for sakanas aver, we are not over issa deraisa, only issa derabanan. So if somebody has the risk of losing their arm, we cannot be over issa deraisa on Shabbos to save them. We could be over issa derabanan. Derech Agav, just a side point, Lemaisa, almost always when there's a Sakanas Aver, we're going to say that there's some element of Sakanas Nefashis, and therefore we're going to be Mechal Shabbos even Deraisa anyways, 99.9% of the time, Lemaisa. However, from a theoretical standpoint and a pure halachic standpoint, the halacha is, if it's merely Sakanas Aver, but not Sakanas Nefashis at all, the halacha is that we let the person lose his aver, not to be overis deraisa. So, who wins? Shabbos or Sakanas Aver? Shabbos is more important than Sakanas Aver. What about Shabbos versus Pekuach Nefesh? So we all know Shabbos is nitcha for Pekuach Nefesh. When it comes to saving a life, we push Shabbos aside to save a life. So if Shabbos is more important than an arm, and saving a life is more important than Shabbos, then for sure saving a life is more important than an arm. And therefore you should have to let your arm get cut off to save the life, and rather have your arm get cut off than kill Shimon. However, L'maisa the Rabaz says the Kal V'chomer we don't go say that l'halacha. Why? There's a call. Ein Einshin Min Adin. And since Ein Einshin Min Adin, we're not going to tell you that your arm should get cut off in order that you don't kill Shimon. Second, when you get your arm cut off, you're putting yourself in a case of Safek Pekuach Nefesh, and you do not put yourself in Safek Pekuach Nefesh in order to save somebody else from Vadei Pekuach Nefesh. And that's really the important point for us, as the Rabaz continues, that it's a midas chasidus to give an aver to save somebody else's life, but if it's Safek Pekuach Nefesh, if you're putting yourself in a matzav of Safek Pekuach Nefesh to save somebody else's life, you are a chasid shoita. It's the wrong thing to do. The pasuk, the Torah teaches us, chayecha koidim. Your life goes first. So you don't put yourself in risk to save somebody else. We know in halacha we always treat Safek Pekuach Nefesh kevadei Pekuach Nefesh, and therefore chayecha koidim. Your life comes first. If you have that one bottle of water in the desert, you drink it. And therefore, you don't put yourself in sakana to save somebody else. There's somebody else who's drowning in the raging waters. You could jump in. Safek, you'll die to save him. Zatar Abaz, if you jump in to save him, you are a chassid shaita. It sounds a little surprising to us, and I would think, just chassid. Our initial svara is that's the most amazing thing to do, to risk your life to save another yid. But the Rabaz calls you a chassid shaita. L'maisa, the Sma quotes, and also the Kes of the Mishnah as well, they both quote a Yerushalmi, and the Yerushalmi says that you're chayiv to put yourself into a matzav of Safek Pekuach Nefesh to save another yid who's in a case of Vadei Pekuach Nefesh. So this mamish have been katzla machlaikis. Now this Yerushalmi quoted by the Sma doesn't make it to the Bavli, and it's not brought in the Torah. It's not brought in the Shulchan Aruch. It doesn't make it into our halacha, the Sma, and l'chayra, l'fi halacha, it seems to be the halacha is going to be like the Radbaz, and the Maisa, the Rabbeinu Yoina, and obviously the Radbaz, and the Shulchan Aruch Harav, all paskin that one should not put themselves into a case of Safek Pekuach Nefesh in order to save somebody else who's in a scenario of Vadei Pekuach Nefesh. Now the Maisa, Moshe brings a svara, and it's very interesting when Moshe does this, because if Moshe wasn't Moshe, and he would bring a svara that's seemingly against all the modern poskim and the poskim in the last 200 years, and he doesn't have any strong proofs in the Gemara, you would throw him out of the Beis Medrash and say, who are you to bring such a svara? But Rav Moshe happened to be Rav Moshe, so Rav Moshe was able to bring such svaras. So Rav Moshe said like this: we know there's a svara. Do I kill Reuven? if a guy comes to me and says, I'm going to kill you unless you kill Shimon, are you allowed to kill Shimon? No. Why not? My chazis. Who says your life is more important than his life? You have to use svara. And, we don't know the value of life. Life is life. Once when it comes to a situation of deciding who lives, we're going to start weighing up and valuing what's more important. Surely, Vadei Pekuach Nefesh is a bigger problem than Safek Pekuach Nefesh. And therefore, if that guy's Vadei going to die, and you're only Safek going to die, so yes, you should risk your life in order to, you're not mechuyev to, but you should risk your life to save that other guy. Because if you weigh up Vadei Pekuach Nefesh versus Safek Pekuach Nefesh, we can learn out from the Maichaz's Svara that we would rather be in a scenario of Safek Pekuach Nefesh than to be in a situation of Vadei Pekuach Nefesh, and you should risk your life. Now I actually hear the Svara of Moshe, but when, the Shulchan Aruch Harav says otherwise, and the Baz says otherwise, and Rabbeinu Yonah says about otherwise, and it seems to be not the Psak of the Bavli, it's not brought on the Shulchan Aruch. And it's not like he's claiming. As I said, if Rav Moshe wasn't Rav Moshe, I think we would throw him out of this medrash. But Rav Moshe was Rav Moshe, so it's Rav Moshe. Halacha l'maisa, I think you do what your heart tells you. Whether you go, if you don't go with Rav Moshe, it's certainly what reason. You have your Baz, you have your Shulchan Aruch Harav, and if your heart tells you to go with the Rav Moshe, nobody can tell you otherwise. It's the Rav Moshe. But there's definitely a lot of other poskim that didn't go with Rav Moshe. So when this Shayla came up 30, 40 years ago about giving a kidney, is it a good thing to give a kidney? Most of the big name poskim originally came out, including the Tzitz Eliezer and Rav Yoshev and Rav Vadia originally came out and said you should not give your kidney. Don't give a kidney. Why? You're putting yourself in a matzik of Safek Pekuach Nefesh in order to try to save this guy who's in Vadei Pekuach Nefesh. They quoted the Rarbaz. You're a chassid shaita if you do that. You shouldn't do that. Don't risk your life to save somebody else. However, Lemaisa, as time, and some people still quote these poskim and make it into a big machlokes. But I feel that whoever's still quoting those poskim are being toya. They're making a mistake. Because it's clear that the medical metzias has changed. And nowadays, and as Rav Vadia points out very clearly, and I think it's a good var, and Rav Vadia, by the way, originally answered, but now he's been chayzer to be matter, and he says like this, now it's a very, very small sakana. Surely, any time when the Gemara says you should jump in the water to save somebody, or you should scare away the bandits to save somebody who's in the matzav of Pekuach Nefesh, surely there was some element of danger. We obviously weren't at that point to suffer Pekuach Nefesh because the Radbaz wasn't arguing on Gemara. But you can't tell me there was no element of danger. There obviously was some minor degree of danger. So if there was some minor degree of danger, you see, it's a good thing to put yourself in minor danger in order to save another yid. Nowadays, it's not major danger anymore. 99% of the people are fine. I don't know if that's the exact statistic, but the high majority of people are fine after giving a kidney. And therefore, you can't call that Safek Pekuach Nefesh anymore. That's now minor danger. And if to put yourself in a matzah of minor danger, it's a mitzvah. Nobody's telling you you're chayav to do it, but it's certainly a midas chasidus for somebody that wants to go and put themselves in that minor danger in order to save another yid. And most poskim nowadays think it's a very praiseworthy thing to give a kidney. Not that they are arguing on those previous poskim of the last dar. Rather, there's just pashut a different mitzias on the table, and with this different mitzias, then it would be fine. But it would be very difficult for anybody to claim that you're mechuyev to give the kidney, because as we saw, based on that shach who made it tzarech in, whether you're chayiv to give a limb of your body in order not to be over loy saseh, so even if it would be a potential loy saman adam reyecha, l'maisa, we can't say you're mechuyev to give up a limb when it's lo sama adam riacha, and therefore it would be very difficult for anybody to claim that somebody's chayev to. But if somebody would like to, l'chayra, it certainly meets chasidus. It's certainly a mitzvah, and I would venture to say that at least most of the poskim that originally came out 30-40 years ago to aser and advise against kidney transplants would now, and donations, would be chayzer in their psak and say it's a good thing. Shkayach for listening. Always a pleasure.